Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, I came to this cavern to escape the hustle and bustle of city life. I wanted a few quiet days in the woods, with only the sound of the wind blowing through the trees and the crackling of a fire. But from the first night, I knew something was wrong. The small cabin was deep in the woods in northern Washington state. About 2 miles off the main road. I rented it online, and the owner said it was the perfect place to rest and meditate. I arrived late in the afternoon. The sky was a dull grey with heavy clouds, and cold air seeped through my clothes when I opened the cabin door. The hinges squeaked like the moans of someone imprisoned for a long time. Inside, everything was covered in a thin layer of dust, but still neat. In the corner of the room was a large mirror with a dark wooden frame that looked strangely old. I told myself it was probably an antique for decoration, but the light from the window, reflected off the mirror, sent a chill down my spine. That night, I lit the fireplace, turned on the yellow light, and made a cup of coffee. The temperature outside dropped rapidly, as if the night in the woods had swallowed all the warmth. I sat down on the armchair to read a book, but there was a slight noise behind me. I turned around. Nothing but the mirror reflecting I sat there in the flickering firelight. I saw myself, but for a fleeting moment my eyes in the mirror seemed to glance in another direction, not in the same direction as me. A creepy feeling ran down my spine. I smiled faintly, trying to reassure myself that I was tired, and the firelight distorted the image. Went to bed early, but sleepiness never came. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard something like footsteps dragging on the wooden floor. When I opened my eyes, I saw no one. There was only the dim moonlight shining through the curtain and reflecting on the mirror in the corner of the room. I looked at it and saw my reflection still lying on the bed, but something was wrong. The reflection in the mirror wasn't breathing. I saw the reflection's chest was still while I was still breathing evenly. I sat up. My heart was pounding, and looked more closely. The reflection in the mirror slowly turned its head towards me, even though I hadn't moved. Yet he rushed to pull the blanket over my head and lay still like a scared child, waiting until morning. When the first ray of sunlight penetrated the curtain, I dared to open my eyes again. Everything quiet, with only my own breath echoing in the space. I walked to the mirror and tried to touch the cold and foggy glass, but when my hand touched the mirror, a layer of white mist spread out in the shape of my hand, as if someone was touching it. From the other side, I decided to go outside to breathe some fresh air to dispel the fear of the morning. The forest was full of fog, and the smell of damp wood crept into my nose. I heard the birds chirping in the distance, and tried to tell myself that everything was just my imagination. But when I turned back to look through the window, I saw a figure standing in the cabin right in front of the mirror. I didn't have time to realize it. When the figure raised its hand and waved, I ran to open the cabin door, but there was no one in there, just the mirror reflecting the empty room. I sat down, trying to remember every detail of last night, and realized that the reflection had gradually become independent. It seemed to be observing me and trying to imitate me, not always in sync. I decided to try something. I raised my hand and held it there for a few seconds. The reflection also raised its hand, but it didn't lower when I lowered my hand. I stood there frozen. My heart stopped beating for a few long seconds. Endless. The shadow in the mirror tilted its head slowly and smiled a crooked smile that seemed to be stretched too far. I stepped back, but my foot tripped over a chair, and I fell to the floor. When I raised my head, the mirror was empty. The reflection disappeared. That night, I didn't dare sleep. I placed a chair in front of the mirror and sat watching until morning. Outside, the rain started to fall heavily on the wooden roof. The sound of the rain mixed with the sound of the wind, creating a gloomy song. I thought I was used to the feeling of loneliness, but I wasn't. I realized I was no longer alone in this cabin. My reflection had woken up, and it was trying to get out. I heard a light knocking sound coming from behind the mirror, as if someone was knocking on the door, asking for help. Or inviting. I stared at the mirror. My eyes were still looking back, but there was something else in that look. I knew I shouldn't stay another night, but even though I left, I still felt those eyes watching me from the mirror every time I turned away. I heard a soft breath echoing behind my neck. This story had only just begun, and I knew it for sure. One thing is that sometimes the reflection is not just an image of us, but something waiting for the chance to replace us forever. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of damp wood and cold ashes in the fireplace. My eyes were puffy from not sleeping all night. I walked slowly to the mirror where the reflection had disappeared last night. The chair I had used to block the mirror was still there, but now the glass was mottled, as if covered in thick fog. I took a deep breath and exhaled, trying to calm myself. I thought I just needed a few hours rest, and then I would be done, but as I turned away, the knock sounded 3 times deep and slow, as if someone was tapping with their fingertips from behind the mirror. I stood there, frozen. My heart was pounding, and my throat was dry. Didn't dare go near. I stepped back and hurried out of the cabin. The cold air rushed in, waking me up. The sky was overcast, and thick fog covered the forest. I walked along the small path leading to the trail, hoping to catch a phone signal to call for help, but the signal was completely lost. When I turned my head to look back, I saw the cabin window reflecting a dim light, and in that moment, I saw a figure standing behind the curtain. I gasped and tried to close my eyes, but the image was still imprinted in my mind. Had I decided to go back to the cabin to get my things and leave immediately? I packed up quickly, but the knocking sound kept ringing in my head, getting louder and louder, as if urging me. I grabbed the suitcase and pulled it towards the door, but as soon as I unlocked the mirror behind it, it made a slight cracking sound like cracked glass. I turned around and saw the mirror surface cracked in small lines. The light from outside shone in, making it look like a network of cracks spreading. I approached with trembling hands. I didn't know why I did it. Maybe it was curiosity or a strange attraction. I looked down at the mirror and realized there were eyes looking at me from the other side. Those eyes weren't mine. They were darker, deeper, and full of hatred. I quickly backed away. Then I heard a louder cracking sound. Then a black hand reached out and grabbed the wooden frame. I screamed, but no sound came out. My throat choked as if it was being squeezed. I quickly grabbed the table lamp and hit the mirror hard. It shattered into pieces and fell to the floor like glass rain. I stood there, panting, looking around. But the room suddenly became dark, as if all the lights had gone out. I felt the cold air poured out from the broken mirror and the strong smell of iron. I stepped back towards the door, intending to run out, but when I turned back, the door was closed. I knocked on the door and shouted loudly, but the echoes sounded like they were coming from inside the mirror. The wooden floor under my feet started to get wet when I bent down and saw black water streaks spreading from the broken mirror pieces. I didn't dare touch them, just stood there, watching, until they stopped moving. A moment later, the air in the room seemed to stop, and a very soft sigh sounded from somewhere. I turned around and looked back at the mirror on the wall. Only the empty wooden frame remained, but in that dark frame, I saw my shadow appear again, standing in the frame, looking out with a pale face and lips moving, as if trying to say something. I felt my head spinning. I mustered up all my courage to approach the mirror frame. The shadow in the frame smirked, then raised its hand To signal silence, I heard my heart pounding in my ears. Then the shadow slowly retreated deeper into the darkness and disappeared. Suddenly, the frame collapsed to the ground. I screamed and ran out as fast as I could. Looking back, I ran through the fog towards the main road. Each step felt like being pulled back by an invisible force. When I reached the edge of the forest, I turned around to look at the cabin, still standing there. In the white fog, as if nothing had happened, I stood there for a long time, then felt something hard in my pocket. I reached in and pulled out a small piece of mirror. It was covered in dust and dried blood. I remembered I didn't have it with me. I threw it on the ground, but it didn't break. The dim light shone in making me see my own reflection in that small mirror, and that face smiled again. Turned around and ran out of the forest, not daring to stop. I don't know how I got to the nearby gas station. The attendant looked at me surprised when I walked in with dirty clothes and a dazed face. I could only say a few broken words. The mirror cabin had someone in it. He advised me to stay the night in town and call the police if necessary, but I knew no one would believe me. I sat alone in the break room, looking out the window, seeing the moonlight reflecting on the glass, and in that light I saw again those eyes looking at me from outside. I gently closed the curtains, but I could still feel the gaze following me. From that day on, I never dared to look in the mirror after dark, because I knew there was something waiting on the other side, waiting to come back to this world through my reflection. The next morning the police came to the cabin. As I told them, I sat in their car. My hands were shaking and cold sweat ran down my back. The sky was still grey and cloudy, and the forest was still eerily silent. The two police officers, one named Miller and the other Daniels, looked at me with eyes that were both worried and skeptical. I pointed to the cabin and said that there was something unusual inside. Miller stepped down first and opened the cabin door. The sound of the hinges made a long screech in the cold air. I saw his face frown slightly when the flashlight shone inside. I followed them into the cabin. The wooden floor still had traces of broken mirror pieces scattered everywhere. Miller knelt down to pick up a piece and held it up to the light it reflected. The red and blue lights outside the police car creating a strange color. Daniels approached the wall where the broken mirror hung, but behind the wooden board there was something wrong. A part of the board was loose, as if it had been recently removed and closed. He used a small knife to pry it open, and a gap appeared inside. The space was dark and about a few meters deep. Feet smelled of mold and the pungent smell of rust. Miller shone the light in, and the three of us were silent inside. There were not only cobwebs, but also something that made my heart freeze in the dim darkness. Was the shape of an old wooden box covered in dust and dried vines. Daniels carefully pulled it out and placed it in the middle of the wooden floor. The box was locked with a rusty metal wire, but when he touched it, the lid swung open as if someone inside had pushed it open. A thin black smoke escaped, making me step back, instinctively telling me not to be there. Inside the box was an old diary and a few black and white photographs stained with dried blood. Miller carefully opened the diary with gloves on the first pages, almost rotten, but I could still read a few scribbled lines. I stood behind, looking over his shoulder. Those lines made me shiver. Nova 14. 1967, we had completed the ritual. I saw him in the mirror. He smiled, and I knew I was no longer alone. Here he promised to keep me forever. Miller looked up. I asked him if he knew anyone who had lived here before. I shook my head. I only rented the cabin online, but the owner didn't leave any information. Daniels flipped through the last few pages of the diary. The handwriting became more hurried and scribbled. They said he wanted out, but we won't let him. He was angry. The mirror was broken. Blood was everywhere. If anyone found, please burn this cabin. Miller closed the diary. His face became tense. I could clearly see the flashlight in his hand shaking slightly. Daniel suggested leaving the cabin to call more people to check, but when he returned, the main door slammed shut, as if a strong wind had blown through. We were all startled. Miller tried to open the door, but it didn't budge. I looked out at the broken mirror on the floor and saw small pieces of glass starting to vibrate and moving slowly, as if being sucked to a point in the middle of the room. We slowly backed up to the wall. Miller yelled at me to stand still and pulled out his gun. But I could clearly see our reflections in the mirror were no longer synchronized. In the mirror, I was still standing still, while in real life, I had backed away. Daniels fired a shot into the wall. The sound of the explosion echoed in the small room, making my ears ring when the smoke cleared the mirror. Stopped shaking, but the reflection was still there. A twisted smile gradually appeared on its face. Daniels stepped forward and hit the wall where the mirror used to hang. The wood broke off, revealing a deeper gap. He looked down into the flashlight beam, only to see the wall was empty. But as soon as he turned away, a pale hand reached out from the darkness, grabbed his ankle, and pulled Daniels down and was dragged into the gap. Miller shouted loudly and ran to pull him back, but only had time to see his face turn pale before disappearing. I stood there, frozen, only hearing the sound of the wind whistling through the crack in the door, and a very soft whisper coming from the wall. Cavity Miller pulled me to the door. This time the door opened as if it had never been locked. We rushed out. The cold wind blew in my face. I looked back at the cabin one last time. The light in the room suddenly went out. Only the moonlight reflected off the broken mirror on the floor. In that moment, I saw Daniels' shadow standing in the mirror, raising his hand for help, then disappear completely. Lost. Miller called for backup and asked for the area to be cordoned off. I sat down on the ground. My hands were shaking and my heart was pounding. I knew this wasn't over. The thing in the mirror was still there. It hadn't been released and was probably waiting for the next person to dare look at it. After Daniels disappeared, Miller called in additional backup teams. The area was quickly cordoned off. I was taken back to town for questioning, but my mind was restless. What happened in the cabin kept replaying in my mind like a nightmare. I could clearly hear Daniel's voice as he was dragged into the darkness, and his last frightened eyes seemed to be looking at me. My heart was filled with guilt and fear that what was in the mirror had not stopped. That night, I was in a small motel next to the highway. It was raining heavily. The wind was howling through the windows. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't. My eyes were staring at the bathroom mirror, reflecting the flashing lights. I pulled the curtains closed and covered my head with the blanket. The rain was still pounding on the roof like 1,000 hands tapping. I fell asleep in a fitful dream and dreamed that I was standing in the middle of the cabin. The window was open, the wind was cold, and the mirror on the wall was still intact, reflecting Daniels' figure waving to me. I woke up in the middle of the night, sweat drenching my back, my phone vibrating, a text message from an unknown number. Only 3 short words: Daniels is here. I was stunned, looking at the pale blue light of the phone screen reflecting on the mirror in my room. I saw a vague figure standing behind me. I turned around, but there was no one, just a cold breath on my neck. I shivered, not daring to turn off the light, and sat still waiting for morning. The next morning, I was called to the police station. Miller and 2 other police officers would return to the cabin to find out more. He said they had detected Daniel's radio signal was still weak in the area. I was about to refuse to go with them, but somehow a part of me wanted to know the truth. I got in the car with them. The forest road was wet. After the night rain, the trees were heavy with water, and the road was covered in fog. When we arrived, the cabin was still standing in the middle of the forest, as if nothing had happened. The door was slightly open. The wind blew through, making a creepy whistling sound. Miller signaled for everyone to turn on their flashlights and go inside. I followed their footsteps. The wooden floor was still damp, and the smell of rust was strong. They checked every corner of the room. Everything looked like someone had moved the tables and chairs. There was no trace of a wooden box or broken mirror. The wooden frame where Daniels was dragged into was sealed with new boards. A young policeman discovered something strange. When he shone a flashlight on the opposite wall, the light reflected faintly, as if there was something shiny. Miller approached and touched the wall and was startled by the icy cold surface. When he used a knife to scrape off the thin layer of paint, inside was a flat, smooth piece of mirror that was enough to reflect the entire room. I walked back and saw the images of 4 people in there, but there was one thing that made me freeze in the mirror reflection. There was a 5th person standing behind me. I turned around and there was no one. Miller also saw it and shouted to retreat, but at that moment, Daniel's voice faintly echoed from somewhere in the mirror. "Miller, Daniel, is that you?" His voice was trembling. A hoarse voice answered from the mirror, "Save me from here." I was trapped. I stepped back, my heart pounding, and the young policeman turned on the flashlight and shone it straight into the mirror. The light reflected back, making him fall to the ground and scream loudly. In that moment, I saw the movement of hands in the mirror, pale, pressed against the glass, trying to push outside. Miller pulled me towards the door, but the door slammed shut. We were locked inside the room. The flashlight light flickered. Daniel's voice echoed everywhere, mixed with the steady tapping. I saw Daniel smiling in the mirror, and his eyes were now black as an endless abyss. Miller tried to break the mirror. He used the butt of his gun to hit the glass 3 times. Hard, but it didn't break. Instead, from the crack, thick black liquid oozed out onto the floor, giving off a strong fishy smell. We were surrounded by a hazy cold when Miller turned around. I saw a long scratch on his face, like a fingernail. I pulled him out of the room, while laughter echoed from the mirror, sounding like Daniel's voice, mixed with someone else. We escaped. Outside, the door finally opened. I collapsed on the damp ground. Miller closed the cabin door, ordered to seal this place. He said he would have people destroy the cabin. I didn't dare say a word, just saw my breath turn white in the cold air, and in the moment of moonlight, looking down at the police car window, I saw Daniel's face reflected in it, looking at me with a quiet smile. That night, when I returned to town, I knew one thing for sure, that the thing in the mirror was not just staying in the cabin anymore. It had found its way out into the outside world through our own reflections. A week after leaving the woods, I got a call from Officer Miller, saying they had applied for a warrant to destroy the cabin at the request of the crime scene investigation team due to evidence of a dangerous incident. He said in a low voice, "We have to end this." I agreed to come and witness, just to feel assured that the monster in the mirror would be gone forever. That afternoon, the sky was grey and foggy. The road leading into the woods was wet from the rain the night before. I sat in the car with Miller and 2 firefighters. They brought gas cans and safety equipment. The cabin appeared in the middle of a dark clearing. The dark wood roof mottled with mold like traces of time and something older than a person. Miller got out first. He looked around and said softly, "The air here is strange." I felt it too. The wind seemed not to be blowing, but the leaves still shook slightly, as if someone was walking by. When the first flames caught from the corner of the house, the red light spread quickly, covering the wood surface. The crackling sound rang out in waves. I stood far away, a few meters, but still felt the heat blowing on my face in the dancing firelight. I saw my shadow fall on the ground, and suddenly, that shadow separated from my body. It moved slowly towards the cabin. I closed my eyes and shook my head, trying to believe it was an illusion caused by the firelight, but when I opened my eyes again, the shadow was still walking. Miller shouted for his men to back off as the fire started to spread quickly to the roof of the cabin. The fire licked along the wooden slats and lit up the surrounding forest, creating a sickly yellow light in the middle of the night. I saw something in the smoke, moving slightly, like the shape of a person standing in the middle of the burning house. I squinted, trying to see more clearly, and recognized the familiar face. It was Daniel's. His face appeared blurry through the smoke, his mouth opened wide, as if shouting something, but no sound came out. Miller also saw that he rushed forward a few steps, but a strong wind suddenly blew through, and the smoke and ashes flew everywhere. Daniel disappeared, only the fire was still burning. A small explosion rang out from inside the cabin, making everyone startled. Shards of wood flew splash, and a thick black smoke poured out of the window, as if something was trying to escape. One of the firefighters fell down, coughing. Miller pulled him out and shouted everyone back away. I could clearly see the look in his eyes at that moment of extreme fear. In that thick black smoke, I saw something else, not only Daniel's face, but also many different faces, overlapping, men and women, old and young. Their eyes were all empty. Their eyes were all empty. Their mouths moved in unison, as if whispering something. The fire didn't seem to burn them, but only made their shapes clearer. I heard the sound of wind mixed with what sounded like horse laughter coming from inside. Miller signaled the fire crew to retreat further. He shouted that no one was to return to the cabin. I stood there watching the house burn down as pieces of ash flew up and then fell to the ground like black rain. As the fire began to die, the light faded, but in the ashes there was still a faint spot of light. I stepped closer. I saw it was a piece of mirror left in the ashes. The glass was still intact, though the surroundings were burnt down. I looked in and saw myself reflected in it, but the face in the mirror didn't look like me. Its eyes were dark and deep, and there was a cold smile on my lips. I jumped back and fell to the ground, and the mirror was still shining brightly. A flash of light, then it went out. Miller came over to pull me up. He asked if he was okay. I just nodded, unable to say a word. The whole team finished cleaning up and left the forest. I sat in the car, looking through the window, saw the dim moonlight shining on the ground where the cabin used to be. Smoke was still rising slightly, and in that dim light I swore I saw a figure standing still in the ashes, watching us until the car left the forest. At night, I returned to the hotel, feeling empty and tired. I thought everything was really over until I turned on the room light and saw something sparkling on the table, a small piece of mirror placed neatly in the middle of the table with black ash around it. I didn't bring it with me, and no one knew what happened. I touched the cold piece of glass, but inside there was a faint light spreading into shape. The figure of my face in the mirror slowly opened its eyes and whispered something that I couldn't hear clearly. Let go of the mirror, but the whisper still echoed in my head as clearly as if it was right next to my ear. I knew that the fire couldn't destroy the thing in the mirror. It only made it stronger, and now it followed me out of the forest. After the night of the cabin fire, I left town as soon as possible. I drove 4 hours without stopping, just wanting to get away from the woods as fast as possible. The morning sky was hazy gray, and the road wound through the wet, winding mountains. I stopped at a small rest stop near the state border. I rented a simple room with only an old bed and a peeling wooden table. I put my suitcase down to take a shower and take a long nap, but when I turned on the room light, I saw something shiny on the table like a speck of dust. I walked closer and realized it was the small piece of mirror I left on the table at the old hotel. Couldn't understand why it was there. I remembered very clearly I left in the night and locked the door carefully. I picked up the mirror. It was cold as ice. The glass was covered in mist. I wiped it off and saw my reflection, tired and haggard, but behind that reflection, there was a figure standing by the window. I turned around. There was no one, just the night and the yellow streetlights shining through the curtains. I threw the mirror in the desk drawer and locked it, and tried to sleep, but in my mind, Daniel's voice still faintly called my name, as if from far away. Around 3 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of a light knocking sound coming from the table. I tried to listen to the knocking. It stopped for a few seconds, then continued, this time louder. I turned on the light and slowly opened the drawer. The mirror was still there, but now the glass surface was clear. The light reflected, shimmering as if it was moving inside. I looked closer and saw the image of the cabin in the woods appearing in the mirror. The house burned down, but smoke still rose among the ashes. Then a hand reached out from the ashes and placed it on the glass. I threw the mirror away. My heart pounding, it fell to the floor, but didn't break. Just rolled a few times, then stopped. The light from the lamp reflected, causing the mirror to flash a red streak. I didn't dare touch it, just sat still, staring. A moment later, the room's electricity suddenly went out. I was plunged into darkness. Only the dim red light from the mirror was shining on the ceiling like a breath. I could clearly hear light footsteps around the room. Even though no one was there, the air was thick, as if I was underwater. I trembled and searched the light switch. When turned on, everything returned to normal. The mirror piece was still there, but on the glass surface appeared a faint handprint, as if someone had just touched it from the inside. The next morning, I took the mirror piece outside and threw it in the trash can behind the motel. I turned my back and left, feeling somewhat relieved, but that night, when I entered the room, I saw it lying neatly on the table with the words in steam on the mirror surface, "Don't go." I felt my throat dry and my hand numb. I took a towel to cover the mirror piece and went out to call Miller to tell him everything. He was silent for a long time, then said there was only one way to escape, was to put the mirror piece back in its original place and destroy it completely. I didn't want to go back to that forest, but deep down I knew if I didn't do that, I would never escape. That night I couldn't sleep. I heard breathing in the room. Each breath was light but clear. I turned on the light, and every time the light came on, everything was silent. When I turned off the light, the breathing sound appeared again. I sat up, took the towel off the mirror piece, wanting to check it, reflected the empty room, but the shadow of the person behind me still there, motionless. I turned back quickly. There was nothing, then looked in the mirror again. The figure disappeared, leaving only me with a pale face and red, swollen eyes. I was afraid of myself because it seemed like the face in the mirror was no longer identical to me. I packed up my things, intending to leave that night, but as soon as I opened the door, I saw the hallway was dark, and at the end of the hallway, the weak light reflected from the small window where there was a shadow of someone standing still, looking at me. I stepped back, closed the door quickly, then leaned against the wall, trying to breathe. I heard footsteps slowly approaching, then stopped right in front of the door. I held my breath, waiting, but only heard a soft whisper through the crack of the door, returning the mirror to him. I sat down on the floor, not daring to move until dawn. The next morning, I opened the door. There was no one in the hallway. Only a small piece of paper slid through the crack of the door. Written in black, shaking ink, the cabin was still not asleep. I knew I had no choice. I had to go back to where it all began and end everything before it took away the most important thing in me, my soul. I returned to the forest after 3 days of hesitation. The long road and the cold wind almost exhausted me. I drove to the small turn that led to the trail where the cabin used to be. I stopped the car because the road ahead was covered with white fog. Everything was blurry. Only the black shadows of the trees stretched out like giant hands reaching out. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, took a deep breath, and stepped down into the cold air surrounding me, making me feel like I was entering another world. The sound of broken branches echoed under my feet. Each step was heavy as I followed the familiar path. The smell of burnt wood, mixed with the smell of damp soil, entered my nose. I clearly remembered that this place should have been just a pile of ashes, but when the fog gradually cleared, the shape of the cabin appeared before me, intact to the point that I couldn't believe my eyes. The roof was still dark, the wooden planks were still intact, and the window frame where I had seen Daniel's was still intact. I stood there, my heart pounding, not understanding what was going on. I walked slowly closer to the door. The wind whistled through the wooden cracks, making an eerie sound like someone softly calling my name. I opened the door. The familiar hinge sound, the sound of coal, lingered on the inside of the cabin. Was dark, but inside was clean with no trace of black fire. I smelled the smell of new wood, as if someone had just rebuilt. Everything was back in its place, the table and chair, even the large mirror hung neatly on the wall as before it broke. I stood looking at the mirror. The weak light from the window shone in, causing the glass to vaguely reflect my figure in it. I no longer knew what was real and what was virtual. I moved closer to look at the mirror. The eyes reflected something strange. The look was empty and cold. I closed my eyes for a few seconds, then opened them again. The reflection was no longer synchronized. I raised my hand slowly, but the figure in the mirror stood still, just tilted its head to observe. I stepped back, breathing heavily, trying to stay calm. I called out softly to Daniels, but there was no answer. Only a whisper echoed lightly throughout the room, like many people were talking quietly. I turned around, looking around. The cabin was empty, no one. Suddenly, a small noise rang out from the wall, where the wooden hole had been pried open before. I moved closer, putting my hand on the wooden surface. It was cold and damp. I put my ear to it, and heard a very soft sound, like footsteps and breathing. I pulled my hand back. My heart was beating fast. The light from the phone reflected on the wall, making me clearly see a dark streak spreading like a flowing watermark. I touched my fingertip with a sticky substance that smelled of metal. I backed away, and when I looked up, the mirror behind me had changed. In the mirror no longer reflected the room, but the image of the burning cabin. The fire rolled up, black smoke flying everywhere. I saw Daniels's shadow standing in the middle of the fire. He raised his hand towards me. His face was distorted, and his mouth was wide open, not making any sound. I screamed and ran to the door, but it slammed shut. I slammed on the door. The sound of wood echoed throughout the room. I turned around to see the mirror on the wall shaking violently, as if something was trying to escape from inside. Then suddenly stopped. The image in the mirror was now the current room, and I was standing in it, but there was someone else behind me. I turned my head quickly. There was no one, just cold air blowing on the back of my neck. I knew I was no longer alone in this cabin. A sound knocking softly from the mirror 3 times, regular, like a heartbeat. Daniels, is it you? Why? I whispered. The knocking repeated again, slower. I felt my eyes burning, the light in the room fading. I approached the mirror, as if hypnotized. Looking deep inside, I saw the night forest appear, and a figure walking back towards the cabin. I realized it was me. I panicked and turned away, but in the mirror, the image continued. I was entering the cabin again, like a loop with no way out. A strong wind blew through, causing the door to open. I rushed out to breathe the cold air until I collapsed to the ground. When I raised my head, the cabin disappeared, leaving only an empty space with a thick layer of fog. I didn't understand what just happened, or if I had ever really left here. I stood up looking around and saw a small piece of mirror lying right next to my feet. The light in it reflected the ash-grey sky, and my eyes in it were as black as the bottom of the abyss. Picked up the piece of mirror and put it in my pocket, knowing I couldn't escape anymore because this place had chosen me. I was the last person to see Daniels, and now it was my turn to see him forever. I returned to my small apartment in the suburbs after a long trip. A feeling of relief mixed with fatigue crept over me. I wanted to believe that everything was over, that the cabin was just an illusion. But when I opened my suitcase to take out my things, the small mirror rolled out of my pocket. I stood there, dumbfounded, watching it fall to the floor and make a soft sound. The dim light reflected on the wall like a weak breath. I don't know why I still have it. Maybe it has somehow followed me like an inseparable part of me. I put the mirror on the table and pulled the curtains to let the outside light flood into the room, making it look normal again. I told myself I would throw it away tomorrow morning, but that night, when the lights went out, I heard a soft tapping sound coming from the table. I opened my eyes in the darkness. The mirror was glowing faintly, as if there was a thin layer of mist around it. I tried to close my eyes and go back to sleep, but in my head, I heard a soft breathing sound and Daniels calling my name from afar. I got up and turned on the light. The weak yellow light was shining on the ceiling, and the room was quiet again, with only a slight chill in the air. I took the mirror and put it away wardrobe and locked it, but the next night it happened again. I dreamed I was standing in a dark room in front of a large mirror. The reflection smiled at me. I couldn't move, I couldn't speak, I only saw myself in. The mirror took a step forward, touched the glass and spoke softly now. It was my turn. I woke up with a start. My whole body was drenched in sweat. Looking around the room was still dark, but the large mirror on the wall reflected a strange light. I walked closer, my heart was pounding, my face in the mirror wasn't tired as usual, but was fresh, my eyes were wide open bright. I've never seen myself like that. Tried to raise my hand, the mirror also raised its hand, but when I lowered it, it still kept the same position. I stood still. Eyes didn't leave the mirror. Then the reflection slowly lowered its hand. The movement was completely independent. I took a step back, then fell on the chair, still couldn't take my eyes off the mirror. The reflection bowed its head, smiled, and turned away, walking away from the frame, leaving the glass blank. I rushed to the mirror to look in. I saw nothing, only pitch darkness. I stood there in silence, not knowing if I was awake or not. When I woke up, I was lying on the bed, not remembering when I fell asleep. The morning light filtered through the curtains onto the wall. The room was strangely quiet. I thought everything was just a dream until I got out of bed and saw faint footprints on the floor. From the mirror straight to the door, I bent down to touch it, still damp, like new. I opened the door and looked out into the hallway. No one was there, only cold air. I turned back to the mirror. My reflection was standing still, but my eyes glanced slightly to the left. I glanced in that direction and saw the wardrobe door shaking slightly upward. Walked closer and opened the wardrobe door where the small piece of mirror was shining brightly. I clearly remembered putting it in the box and locking it, but now it was lying alone among the clothes as if waiting for me to touch. I picked it up to throw it away, but Daniel's voice echoed in my head, "Don't break it." I was scared and threw the mirror piece against the wall. It bounced off and fell to the floor without breaking, but only made a clear sound. I saw my reflection in the distorted glass, and behind me, a blurry figure was approaching. I turned back. There was no one, but the cold air surrounded. I was like fog that night. I locked all the windows, pulled the curtains to cover the big mirror, then lay down and tried to sleep. The sound of the wind outside blew through the crack in the door, like someone was moaning. I covered my head with the blanket, but I could still feel the gaze from the corner of the room. I gently pulled the blanket down a little and saw a dim light coming from the mirror. I sat up, my heart pounding, and looked at it. The reflection was standing close to the glass, looking at me from inside, even though I was still lying on the bed. I stood up, slowly approaching step by step. The reflection in the mirror smiled. A long smile, and slowly reached out as if to touch me. When my fingertips were about to touch the glass, the light in the room suddenly went out. Darkness enveloped me. I heard the sound of breathing blending with my heartbeat. Then a whisper sounded right next to my ear. We were no longer separate. I turned on the light quickly, but there was nothing in the mirror, only the image of the empty room. I stood there alone, but from the corner of the mirror, a pair of eyes opened and stared at me. I knew for sure that my reflection had woken up and was living a parallel life that I couldn't control. That night was the first night I realized the reflection was no longer held in the mirror. I sat on the bed in the dim light of the night lamp. My eyes did not leave the large mirror on the wall. My reflection was still there, but did not follow my movements. I gently lifted my hand. It did not move. I lowered my head. It tilted its head to the side. Its eyes had no light, just two deep black holes. I felt like there was an invisible hand on my shoulder. I turned back to the empty room, but the cold air still blew on my skin. I looked back at the mirror. The reflection took a step forward, and its hand touched the glass. The glass vibrated slightly, emitting a sound like a soft moan. I did not dare to move, just stood there, watching it continue to press its hand against the glass until the tip of my finger went through a flash of light. I instinctively stepped back and saw that hand really sticking out. The hand was white as wax, followed by a thick, cold air spreading throughout the room. I screamed and ran towards the door, but the door would not open. I banged hard until blood oozed from my hand inside the other half of the body. Mirror was walking out bit by bit. The light in the room was flickering continuously. I rushed to the drawer of the table, intending to get something heavy to hit the mirror, but when I turned back, the whole body of the reflection was out of there. It stood facing me just a few steps away, had my face, but it was a more distorted and cruel version. The smile stretched to the tips of the ears, the face was smooth like wax, and deep black eyes had no whites. I backed up against the wall, unable to say a word. The reflection opened its mouth and spoke in a voice identical to mine, but echoing as if coming from inside the mirror. Finally met him. I trembled and asked, "Who are you?" It chuckled softly, then replied, "I am you, but you are not me." I didn't understand, but in my head suddenly remembered Daniel's words in the dream the night before. He wanted to go out. I was just the one who opened the way for him. I shouted loudly, throwing the table lamp at it. But its body didn't move. The light suddenly went out, only darkness covered. I felt cold breath close to my ear, then a whispering voice. "Don't fight me." I waved my hand wildly, touching the cold, smooth face. I ran towards the window, intending to jump out, but the window glass also reflected my shadow, standing on the other side, looking back at me. I saw two shadows of myself, one in the room, one in the mirror, and I didn't know which one was real. The streetlight shone in, creating a weak yellow streak. The reflection in the room remained still, but in the mirror it moved in the opposite direction. I turned to the left, it turned to the right. I backed away, it moved closer. I took a chair and hit the glass face. It shattered, but instead of falling into pieces, it turned into black smoke, flying all over the room. I coughed and choked. The smoke filled my mouth. It was cold as ice. When I opened my eyes again, the room was completely different. All the objects were distorted. The floor was wet and red. Light covered the walls. I realized I was in the other world. Of the mirror in front of me was a room exactly like my room. but everything was in the opposite position. I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around and saw myself walking into the mirror from the outside. His face was calm like someone sleeping. I shouted to call him, but he didn't hear. He sat down on the bed and turned off the light in the room. The room I was standing in was dark. Only the dim light from the broken mirror reflected. I hit the glass hard, trying to escape, but only saw his face in the pale yellow light, smiling and sleeping. I understood that he had replaced me. I ran around the room, looking for a way out, but every door led to a mirror. Every time I opened it, I only saw countless reflections of myself, emotionless and laughing faintly. That laughter echoed back in a long echo like the sound of the wind. I knelt down, covering my ears, not wanting to hear, but that sound went straight into my head like an echo of my own mind. I started to feel tired. My mind was spinning, then the darkness swallowed everything. When I opened my eyes, I saw myself standing in a real room. The lights were on, the windows were wide open, and morning flooded in. I gasped, thinking everything was just a nightmare. But when I looked in the mirror, the face reflected, looked at me with a strange look, and my hands were still covered in black ash. I knew I was no longer in the old world, and the person in the mirror had taken my place. I woke up in a familiar apartment, but everything looked different. The weak light shining through the window made the room look pale. I touched the wall. It felt colder than usual, and the noise from the street sounded like it was coming from far away. I told myself I was still in the real world, but my heart was filled with doubt. I walked into the bathroom to wash my face, and when I looked up in the mirror, the face reflected, smiled. Even though my lips were completely still, I jumped back. Almost falling, the water was still dripping, but the sound was suddenly distorted, as if someone was laughing secretly. I turned away, but the gaze in the mirror still followed. I decided to go out to get some air. I walked along the street where I lived for many years. Everything was the same: the corner cafe, the small bookstore, the grocery store. But when I entered the cafe, the barista looked at me with a strange look. I ordered a cup of black coffee like usual, but he just asked, "Sorry, who are you?" I frowned and said I was a regular here, but he shook his head. "I have never seen you before." That sentence made me choke. I looked around. No one recognized, including the waitress I still talk to every morning. I left the shop with a cold feeling spreading throughout my body. I went to my old workplace, hoping my colleagues would help me calm down, but when I entered the office, the security guard stopped me and asked who I was looking for. I told him my name, but he frowned and said there was someone with the same name working here. I forced a smile and asked to see that person. He called. A few minutes later, I saw myself walking out of the elevator. He looked like me in every detail, from his voice to his gait. He looked at me, smiling, and said, "Sorry, who are you?" I stood there frozen, as if all my strength had been sucked out. I stepped back and looked around. All my colleagues looked at me like a crazy person. I shouted that he wasn't me, but no one believed. The other man approached me and said softly, "I think you're mistaken," then turned away. His smile was still the same. I saw his eyes glance towards the hallway mirror, reflecting the image of both of us, in which there was only one me in the mirror, and he had no reflection. I shouted, pointing at the mirror, but no one saw what I saw. The security guard pulled. I went out. I struggled, desperately screaming that he had taken my body, but my voice sounded like it was coming from afar, distorted and unclear. I was taken to the hospital for a psychological test that kept me overnight. In a cold white room, I sat staring at the blank wall. My mind was spinning. I asked the doctor if it was possible for someone to look exactly like me, to the point of being indistinguishable. He just smiled and shook his head while he was taking Notes: I saw my reflection on the glass door, but the shadow didn't follow my movements. It stood still, staring at me, then put a finger to my lips, signaling silence. I was scared back and screamed. The doctor turned around but saw nothing. I realized I was slowly losing control that night in the dark hospital room. I lay staring at the ceiling. The blue light from the hallway shone through the glass door, reflecting my face, but the eyes in there were dark and deep. I tried to close my eyes, but whispers rang out from everywhere. Daniel's voice mixed with my own voice, saying, "You're on the other side, don't fight anymore." I opened my eyes and looked around, but the room was empty. I ran to the door and knocked hard, but the door didn't move. The mirror on the wall shook. The light flickered, and the reflection slowly faded, leaving only darkness. I heard the laughter echoing from inside, cold and endless. The next morning, the nurse opened the door. I sat silently in the corner of the room. She asked me if I was okay. I just nodded. She gave me a small mirror to look at myself because of the bruise on my face. I looked in and saw the reflection smiling, even though my lips were still I. Through the mirror on the ground, it shattered, but in each small piece there was still a pair of eyes looking out. I screamed, covering my face, but the nurse just looked at me in fear and left. From that day on, I was locked in an isolation room. They said I had signs of hallucination disorder, but I knew the truth. I was no longer me, the person living my life out there. There was no shadow in the mirror, and he was gradually taking over all my memories. I was left with only my breath and the fear that one day he would completely replace me, and no one would remember I ever existed. I sat in the isolation room for days, with no one to talk to except the nurse who brought food and medicine every morning. They looked at me with wary eyes, as if afraid to touch something unclean. I felt like I was slowly being erased from this world. My voice was getting weaker. My memories were fading. Only the image of the cabin and Daniel's eyes in the fire remained. I knew there was only one person who could believe me, Police Officer Miller, who had seen it with his own eyes. I remember him saying he would follow up on the case, but then never contacted me again. I needed to hear his voice even once. I waited until the night when the hospital was quiet, stole the landline phone in the duty room and dialed Miller's number. I still remembered that number because it had appeared on the business card in my pocket. I pressed each number with trembling hands. The bell rang for a long time. The sound echoed in the empty space, then stopped. A deep, hoarse male voice said hello. I breathed a sigh of relief. "Miller, it's me." I had just finished speaking when the other end of the line was silent for a few seconds. Then the other voice answered. The voice sounded exactly like me. Every word, every beat. "It's me." Holding my breath, listening to the breathing from the other side, slow and steady like my breathing. I asked Miller, "Where is the voice on the other side?" Replied, "He is here with May." Stood up. My heart was pounding. I asked, "Who are you? Why are you imitating my voice?" That voice chuckled a long, distorted laugh, then stopped. He said, "You have been on the other side for a long time, just haven't accepted." I wanted to throw the phone away, but the voice still rang, even though I had taken the headphones off. As if it was coming from all over the room, I covered my ears, but I could still hear every word he whispered. Miller had seen the truth, and he couldn't go back. I shouted for the nurse. They ran in to ask what happened. I couldn't explain, just pointed at the phone, but when they picked it up, only heard a blank tone. From that night, I couldn't sleep every time I closed my eyes. I saw Miller standing in the woods. The weak flashlight shone on his pale face and empty eyes like glass. I heard him say, "Not him, not you, run away." Then the image disappeared. I woke up in the middle of the night, sweating all over. I looked in the mirror room, saw my reflection, smiled slightly, and said, "We saw him together." I knew Miller was no longer alive. The next morning, The doctor came into the room and said they had just received a notice that an officer named Miller had been found missing for many days. His body was discovered near the river, near the woods where the cabin used to be. They said he died of drowning. But I knew the truth differently when they showed me the photo of the crime scene. I saw something that sent a chill down my spine. The calm water reflected his face, and next to it, another face that looked exactly like mine, smiling in the water. Mirror, I asked to see his personal belongings, but they said the police had confiscated them all. I didn't believe it. I waited until night to escape from the hospital room and leave the hospital in the cold of autumn. I went to Miller's old house, hoping to find a clue. The door was unlocked. I walked in the smell of damp and dust covered every corner on the desk. There was a notebook. I opened it and saw scribbled lines he had written down what happened in the cabin. The last line clearly stated he was no longer in the mirror, he was in us's. Soon as I finished reading that sentence, the light in the room flickered. I looked around and saw a wet hand-shaped mark on the wall. Then slowly 5 white fingers appeared. I stepped back, but another hand appeared next to it. Then dozens of overlapping hands, as if trying to push out from the other side of the wall. I rushed to the door and ran as fast as I could, not daring to look back, but I still heard the voice calling from behind me. Miller's voice mixed with mine. He couldn't escape himself. I ran all night until dawn, then stopped by the roadside, still holding Miller's notebook. I opened the last page and saw a new line written in wet ink: burn the notebook before it's too late. I looked around. No one was following me, but I felt like their eyes were still following my every step. I took a lighter from my pocket and lit the notebook. The fire flared up. The yellow light reflected on my face, and in that moment, I saw a second face appear in the firelight. Its smile was exactly like mine. I threw the notebook into the trash and ran towards the city, but that laughter still rang in my ears. I knew I had awakened something deeper in the mirror, and Miller was just the first victim. I returned to the apartment in the evening. It was raining lightly. The city was foggy under the yellow lights. The street was quiet. I stood in front of the door, took a deep breath, trying to believe that everything was just an illusion. I put the key in the door, my hands trembling, the sound of the lock clicking coldly. I opened the door and entered the dark apartment. Only the light from the hallway came through the crack of the door, creating a long streak on the wooden floor. I softly called my name in my head. A strange feeling filled me because I was no longer sure who I was when the lights turned on. The room still looked the same, the sofa in the middle of the room, a small wooden table, a familiar table lamp, but something was wrong. The smell of the air was different. The smell of someone else, strange and damp. I took a few steps. My eyes turned to the sofa, and my heart seemed to stop beating. On it, there was a person sitting still, his back facing me, sitting upright and his shoulders shaking slightly. I called out softly, hoarsely, because I was afraid that person would turn around slowly, his face appearing. My own face. I took 2 steps back, unable to believe my eyes. The yellow light shone on his face, highlighting his deep eyes. Hoik Kang Ko ray of light. A crooked smile lingered. I asked, "Who are you?" He just smiled without saying anything, then tilted his head towards me, the same tilt I usually do in front of the mirror. Every morning, I stammered, asking, "What do you want?" He replied in the same tone, "I want to go home." I was stunned, realizing he was right because he was in my house and I didn't know where I was. Tried to calmly step back towards the door, but it slammed shut. Automatically, as if someone had locked it from the outside, I heard his footsteps on the wooden floor slowly approaching me. Each step was heavy. I ran into the bedroom and locked the door. The knock sounded regularly 3 times. Each time the room vibrated. I looked for my phone to call the police, but the screen only showed my reflection instead of the call number. The face in there stared at me, then smiled exactly like him. I threw the phone to the ground, then looked around the room. The light flickered in the mirror. The wardrobe, his reflection, stood close to the door. I shouted loudly, "Stop!" But when I opened the door to check in the hallway, there was no one. I closed the door and turned back. He was already sitting on the bed facing me for a long time. I clearly saw his skin darken, as if burned, a burning smell lingering in the air. I slowly backed away. He stood up slowly, saying, "I've waited a long time since the cabin caught fire. I still stayed to wait for you to come back." I trembled, shaking my head, saying, "I'm not him." He laughed, "You are me, and I am the real why." Picked up the photo frame on the table and threw it at him. It went through his body like stabbing into smoke. He didn't dodge, just moved closer. The cold air surrounded me. I collapsed on the floor. He bent down, looking straight into my eyes, and said, "You've been in the mirror for too long. Now it's time to change places." I wanted to scream, but couldn't make a sound. I just felt my breath disappear into the air. He reached out to touch my forehead. Everything went dark. I fell into an empty space. The only sound was the sound of my heartbeat, mixed with the sound of falling rain. When I opened my eyes, the room was dark. The only light was from the mirror hanging on the wall. I stood up. I saw myself in there looking out at the world reflected. I saw him sitting on the sofa in the room with his eyes turned to the mirror. He smiled, laughing and waving my hand. I tried to hit the glass, but no one heard me. I screamed and begged, but only cold air responded. He stood up, turned off the light and walked out of the room, leaving me in the dark forever. I realized I had become a reflection of myself trapped on the other side, where there was no sound, no time, only whispers echoed forever. I don't know how much time has passed. I only see in the mirror his image living my life, talking and laughing and sometimes looking back at me with pitying eyes. I know I can't escape because the only door has been closed since I unlocked and entered the apartment. Now I only have one thing to hope, that someone will look in the mirror and accidentally see me. Then maybe I will escape. If they look too long, time in the mirror doesn't flow like in the outside world. I don't know how long I've been here. I only know that each day that passes is exactly the same. The flickering light fades and then goes out. I look through the glass and see my apartment gradually change, objects move places, every little detail. He lives my life perfectly. He knows which chair I sit on to drink coffee, even turns on my favorite music every morning. I can only stand and watch from this side of the cold glass. I don't know how I exist, not eating, not sleeping, just existing like a shadow waiting. One night, I saw the apartment door open. The light from the hallway shining in was the woman who lived next to my room. Her name was Lisa. She used to smile and greet me every time we met in the elevator. Now she entered my apartment, maybe because she heard a strange noise. I wanted to shout a warning, but couldn't. The sound was swallowed in the empty space. She walked slowly into the room. Her eyes looked around, then stopped at the mirror. I clearly saw her face reflected in it, but behind her there was another shadow standing motionless. I realized it was me. The blank look and the distorted face faded. Lisa looked at the mirror, then turned around. There was no one. She shook her head, then laughed, thinking she was imagining it, but I saw in the mirror her reflection still had another pair of eyes watching me. I hit the glass hard, trying to attract attention, but she didn't hear. She just stepped back slightly and walked out of the room. But from that day on, I saw her often looking in the mirror in her apartment. Every time the light reflected through, I saw 2 shadows appear, one of hers and one of mine. I don't know how, but it seems like my consciousness is spreading out of the original mirror. One evening, she called someone "I saw through the mirror," she said in a trembling voice, that her reflection in the mirror was no longer synchronized. Sometimes it looked in another direction, sometimes it laughed when she didn't laugh. The person on the other end of the line probably didn't believe, because she just kept quiet after that. I wanted to help her, but couldn't reach out of the glass. I could only observe and wait in her room mirror. The light flickered intermittently, then my shadow in the mirror of she gradually faded into clearer. My face became clearer. I don't know why, but the feeling of warmth gradually spread through my body, as if I was reviving. Lisa started to lose sleep. I saw her sitting by the window every night, holding a cup of tea that didn't touch her lips. Her eyes were dark and her gaze was scared. She covered the mirror with a towel, but every night the knocking sound still rang out from that direction 3 times regularly. I knew I was calling her, like how Daniels used to call me. I didn't want to hurt her, just wanted her to know I still existed. I don't know what inside me urged me to pull her closer to the mirror, but when she stood up to leave, the hand in the mirror automatically raised up to touch the glass. I clearly saw it was my hand, but I couldn't control it anymore. The glass shook violently and a small crack sounded. Lisa turned around and saw a blurry hand sticking out from the mirror. She screamed back, but stumbled. I wanted to stop. I wanted to pull my hand back, but couldn't. She crawled away, tears streaming down, and the other hand still reached towards her. The cracked mirror piece I saw in her eyes was the image of me pulling myself outside like someone escaping from prison. I screamed without sound, just a breath hitting the glass. The light flashed and everything shattered. When I opened my eyes, I found myself in Lisa's room. She was lying unconscious on the ground, and I stood looking at her from outside the mirror. The room was now a mirror, and I was in the real world. I turned around and looked around. Everything was reversed, but the light was so warm. I took a deep breath, thinking I had escaped, but when I bent down to look at the mirror on the wall, I saw Lisa standing up on the other side. Her face was panicked. Her eyes were full of fear. She hit the glass hard, begging me for help. I touched the mirror, wanting to pull her out, but this time my hand went through. I understood that the position had reversed. She was the one trapped, and I was outside. I stepped back to see her face in the mirror was deformed. Her eyes darkened. I heard 3 knocks echoing from inside the glass. This time I was the one listening, and she was the one on the other side. I understood that feeling better than anyone, but I couldn't go back, because if I did, I would lose a second time. I pulled the mirror cover down to cover and left her apartment forever. From then on, every time I passed any mirror, I saw Lisa's shadow behind me. I knew she was still looking for a way out like I did. And maybe one day someone else would see the 2 shadows in their mirror again. After Lisa disappeared, the building became unusually quiet. People said she moved in the night without leaving a trace, but I knew that wasn't true. I saw her shadow in the elevator mirror. A few days later, her face was blurry. Her eyes seemed to be asking for help. I tried to avoid looking in the mirror every time I left the house, but they were everywhere. In the building, from the hallway glass door to the elevator window, I started to hear 3 beat knocks every night. The knocks were not from the wall, but from the mirror. One morning, a man on the floor below went missing. His wife said that the night before he went to bed, he said he saw someone who looked exactly like him in the bathroom mirror. She thought he was drunk, so she didn't pay attention. He woke up in the morning. He was gone. Only the mirror was cracked. I heard the news. My heart was pounding. I understood the curse had not stopped at my apartment. It was spreading to every floor and every person. People started to cover the mirrors in their houses. Some even took the bathroom mirror off and threw it away, but it was useless, because the window glass was still reflecting and the shadows in it no longer looked like them. The building management installed cameras in the hallway to monitor if anyone sneaked in. A few days later, the system recorded a strange scene at around 3 a.m. The lights were flashing continuously, and in each frame there was another person standing behind the person passing by. But when I checked the scene, I didn't see anyone. I watched the recording with them, and for a few blurry seconds, I clearly saw my face in it, smiling, standing behind the man downstairs before he disappeared. I don't remember going down there, but the image was so real that I felt a chill down my spine. That night, I decided to take off all the mirrors in the house, wrap them in black cloth, and bring them down to the basement to burn them. The fire rose up, casting a red light in my face. The smoke rose high and then dissipated quickly, but I saw, through the smoke, the silhouette of Lisa standing still in the corner. Her face was burned, her eyes were black and empty. I wanted to run, but my legs couldn't lift her. She said it wasn't your fault, but now you can't stop anymore. I screamed, but when the smoke cleared, she disappeared, leaving only the sound of the wind whistling round the walls. The next day, rumors spread throughout the building that someone stands in the elevator. Every night, even though no one calls it, I hear the metal clanking as the elevator moves and feel the cold air every time. The door opens, I stand in the hallway. Looking into the elevator mirror, I see myself in it, but behind me, there is Lisa's shadow. I close my eyes, but when I open them, the shadow is still there. I know the curse is slowly taking away those who see me in the mirror, and soon there will be no one left. One night, I heard a loud knock on the door. I walked up to open it, and saw the middle-aged woman who lived on the floor above her with a pale face. She was trembling and said she saw me walking across the hallway at 3 a.m., but I was standing right in front of her. She asked me if I had a twin. I shook my head. She backed away in fear and ran back to my room. I heard the door slam. I sat down on the ground, feeling like I was living in two worlds at the same time, one real, one reflected, and both were merging. I didn't know who I was anymore. The next night, the power went out, the whole building. The hallway was dark, only the weak light from my phone. I held a flashlight and walked down the hallway. I saw the small mirrors on everyone's doors shaking slightly, as if someone was standing behind me and knocking. I stopped in front of a mirror and saw that it wasn't just me, but 3 other shadows standing close together. Their faces looked like mine and Lisa's, along with many others. I realized that the people who had disappeared in the building were all looking at me from the other side of the glass. I ran as fast as I could, but the knocking sound still followed me everywhere until I fell down the stairs and it stopped. When I opened my eyes, I was in the medical room on the ground floor. The security guard said he found me passed out in the hallway near dawn. He asked me if I saw anything. I just kept quiet because I knew no one would believe me if I told them. I looked through the glass door and saw my reflection. But this time in the mirror, I was standing up and laughing while I was still lying still. I turned away and didn't dare to look anymore, but I felt like that gaze was still following my every step as I left the room. I knew I couldn't hide forever, because the thing in the mirror had found a way to spread to other people. I was just the first person to open the door for it to come out, and now no one could close it anymore. After the night of the power outage, the building was no longer the same. Everyone started to leave, one by one, but no one really left. I saw them disappear in the mirror, and no one came back. I tried to leave this place, but every time I walked out the main door, I appeared in the 7th floor hallway. The weak light from the flickering ceiling light reflected on the cold floor. I ran back and forth many times, but no matter which direction I went, I returned to the same place. I realized I was locked in an invisible loop. The mirrors now covered both sides of the wall. No one knew where they came from. The glass was so flat that it reflected my breath. I walked slowly. The sound of footsteps echoed for a long time like someone else walking. Parallel on the other side of the glass, I stopped, but the sound continued. I tilted my head. The reflection also tilted its head, but a beat slower. Its eyes no longer looked like mine, darker, deeper. I tried to ignore it and continued walking, but with each step, I felt like I was going deeper into the reflection. When I turned back, the hallway behind was different. The mirrors connected together, forming a tunnel without. At the stop, I could no longer see the elevator door or any room door. I touched the cold glass in the mirror. My hand touched its hand at the same time, but I clearly felt a light pull from the other side. I pulled my hand back. My heart was beating fast. I turned right, then left. Everywhere was the same. I started running, but the sound of footsteps reflected, echoed like hundreds of people running together. I stopped looking around. I saw in the mirror not only me, but dozens of versions of me standing still. They looked at me with empty eyes. Then each shadow started to smile. I stepped back and hit the wall, but the wall was also a mirror. I saw myself from every direction. I closed my eyes, trying to calm down. I took a deep breath. When I opened my eyes, everything changed. I was standing in the large hall on the ground floor, bright white light everywhere. People were passing by normally. I thought I had escaped, but when I looked down, my hand was covered in glass, dust, and blood. I looked up at the camera screen in the corner of the wall. I saw the scene of me running around in the hallway alone without any mirror. I stepped back and realized the wall in front reflected me, but I in it was still standing, still not moving. I tried to talk to the reflection, but it only moved its lips without making a sound. I asked, "Who are you?" It answered with my own mouth shape, "I am you." I stepped back and saw the light around me gradually dimming. The mirror misted with water, then dissolved to reveal another scene. The corridors overlapped layer upon layer. Like an endless maze, I saw countless people in there. Each one was a copy of someone looking for a way out. I realized I was just one of them. I ran through the corridor of mirrors, one after another. The flashing lights made my head spin every time I turned a corner. I saw myself walking in the opposite direction, a distorted face and smiling. I rushed towards the end of the corridor, saw a door open, a warm yellow light came out. I ran towards it, but when I put my hand on the doorknob, a voice rang out, "Don't go." I turned around. There was no one, only the reflection in the mirror was looking at me, pleading. I still opened the door and walked, and the light was blinding, but in a moment, I saw countless faces pressed against the glass, smiling. At the same time, on the other side of the door was my apartment. Everything was still intact, but the light outside the window was red like fire. I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking I had escaped, then turned to look at the bathroom mirror. My reflection smiled softly and said, "Welcome back." I touched the glass. It was cold and sticky, like the surface of my skin. I stepped back, but the whole apartment started to shake. Mirrors all over the wall vibrated with each beat. The simultaneous knocks rang out 3 times. I was surrounded by countless sounds echoing from all directions, like hundreds of people were knocking to get out. I closed my eyes and screamed, and when I opened them, I was standing in the middle of the mirror hallway again. Everything was as if it had never changed. I understood that I no longer knew what was real, and maybe I was the reflection of someone. All along I looked around and saw in the distance in the mirror another person walking towards me with a familiar gait. He looked exactly like me, but his eyes were calmer and more real. I realized he was the real body, and I was just the rest. I rushed forward and knocked hard on the mirror, begging him to open me up, but he just looked, then turned away, leaving me stuck forever in the maze of reflections. I wandered in the maze of mirrors for who knows how long. All the paths were the same. The light reflected continuously, making my eyes ache. I couldn't feel the time anymore. Only the sound of footsteps echoed endlessly. I tried to find the door leading back to the apartment, but everything had disappeared. Only thousands of my silhouettes stood motionless on the other side of the glass. I began to realize that I was no longer alone in this world. At first, I only heard a soft breathing sound somewhere behind me. The breathing that wasn't mine was slower and heavier. I stopped, but the sound continued. I walked faster. The breathing also became faster. I turned back to the empty hallway, but my reflection in the mirror didn't stand still. It turned its head in the other direction, its eyes wide open, looking at me. I stepped back and saw in the mirror behind me a long, dark shadow taller than a human, its shoulders hunched, and it moved irregularly. I panicked and ran away without looking back. I ran until I was exhausted. The light gradually faded, as if a thick fog was covering me. I collapsed against the wall, trying to catch my breath. Cold pierced through my skin. I looked up and saw the mirror in front of me. The water vapor on the glass surface had a handprint from inside. I hadn't had time to react when that hand pulled with a strong suction force, pulling me close to the mirror. I tried to resist, but it felt like my whole body was being sucked into a thick substance. I struggled in despair until that hand withdrew, leaving a long streak on the glass surface. I fell down, gasping for breath. The flashing light reflected the red eyes that just flashed and disappeared. Realized the thing was looking for me. Every time I stopped, I heard its footsteps getting closer. I ran by instinct. Every time I looked back, I saw that black shadow passing through each mirror, moving in the opposite direction of me. The reflected light made its shape change. Sometimes it looked like a person, sometimes it looked like smoke. I went deeper into the hallway and began to see broken pieces of mirror on the floor. They were scattered everywhere, reflecting each part of my face, distorted. I picked up a piece and saw my eyes were red, and behind me in the mirror was a black shadow bending down close to my ear. I threw the broken mirror piece to the ground and ran the sound of the wind echoing in the closed space. It sounded like thousands of voices whispering at the same time. I heard each name calling my name, Daniel's voice, Lisa's voice, and Miller. They called me back, as if they were standing right on the other side of the wall. I covered my ears, but the sound still seeped into my head. I screamed to stop, but the screams echoed from all sides. Endlessly, I knelt down, holding my head. I felt the ground shake. The mirrors vibrated with my heartbeat, and in a moment the reflections around me laughed together, crawled up and ran towards the dim light in the distance. It was different from the rest of the maze. I saw a large space with a high ceiling, and in the middle of the room was a giant mirror standing alone. I approached. I didn't see my reflection, but only deep darkness. I called out softly, "Someone in there," and said, "I'm still here." I recognized my voice, but it was cold and unfamiliar. I asked, "Who are you?" It answered, "The person who used to be you." I stepped back, but my feet were stuck to the mirror floor. It started to light up, reflecting countless faces, not mine, but those of people who had disappeared. They stood close each other. Empty eyes. I saw Lisa in the middle of the mirror. Her lips moved, begging him not to let him go. The black shadow behind them moved, stretching as high as the ceiling. Then, crawling through the reflections, an arm reached out from the glass, grabbing the edge of the frame, pulling the whole body out. I screamed and ran, but the hallway disappeared, leaving only white space. I heard a hoarse laugh echoing around me. The black shadow took slow steps, following each time it passed the mirror. The light faded. I slipped and fell into the endless void. The feeling of falling lasted as if there was no end. When I opened my eyes, I found myself standing in the middle of a dark forest. It was drizzling. A mist covered the ground. I didn't understand why. I left the maze of mirrors. I looked around. I saw the cabin that burned years ago, standing tall in the darkness, the fire still flickering in the window. I walked slowly, the sound of dry branches breaking under my feet I could hear clearly. When I got closer, I saw through the glass that black shadow standing in the cabin. Looking out, its smile reflected through the dim fire. It raised its hand to signal me. Hello. I understood that I hadn't escaped. I just turned back to where everyone started. And it followed me out into the real world. It was raining lightly as I approached the cabin. The flashlight in my hand faded because of the steam. The cold, damp air filled the forest with each step I took, made me remember every familiar sound, the wind whistling through the treetops, the sound of water dripping from the old thatched roof. I stood in front of the old warped door. The red fire steam shone through the wooden cracks. In that light, I saw silhouettes moving inside. I took a deep breath and put my hand on the icy cold wooden door handle. I knew I couldn't turn around anymore. The door opened with a long, echoing hiss. I stepped in the heat from the fire in the middle of the room, made sweat immediately, but strangely, the fire had no smoke, only burned brightly and did not give off the smell of burning wood. I looked around the cabin wall, covered with mirrors of different sizes, attached from floor to ceiling. Each mirror reflected me standing in the middle of the room, but the eyes in the mirror were not synchronized. I looked to the left, they looked to the right. I lowered my head, they all looked up. I walked closer to a large mirror in the middle of the room. The firelight reflected on the glass surface, as if there was a liquid moving in front. Eni saw my image in it. Smiling slowly, I backed away, but the reflection kept getting closer until its hand pressed against the glass. I heard whispers from everywhere, voices mixed, Lisa Miller, Daniels, and all the people I had seen disappear. They said, "Go back." There was only one door. I turned my head to look behind the cabin door that had now disappeared. Only the mirror walls surrounded me completely. I was trapped in the middle of hundreds of reflections, all smiling at the same time. Footsteps echoed behind me. I turned around to see a tall black figure stepping out of the mirror amidst the flickering light. It was no longer blurry like before, but clear to the point of fear. The face still had no lines, just a dark void, deep like an abyss. It stopped in front of me, reaching out to touch my chest, saying in a voice I would not exist without you. I backed away, but my back hit the cold glass face that was sticky like breath. I felt it was trembling with my heartbeat. Black figure tilted its head to look around, then raised its hand to point to the ceiling, where hundreds of small mirrors reflected the red fire. In the moment, all the reflections were at the same time. The series of movements no longer followed me. They stepped out of position as if to surround me. I spun around in desperation, looking for an escape, but in every direction I ran, I bumped into the glass. The shadows in it touched the mirror from inside. The red light shone on my face. I felt the world was turning upside down. I screamed that I wanted to escape. I didn't belong here, but the scream disappeared, leaving only a dull echo. The black shadow moved closer. I saw its face slowly taking shape. It was my face, distorted and burned, and its black eyes empty. It said, "I've waited for a long time, now let me live." I understood it was the part I left behind in the fire that night. When the cabin first burned, it was stuck in the mirror world, and I was lucky to escape. But now the boundary has disappeared. It wants to take back its position. I tried to run, but my legs no longer obeyed. The mirror behind me opened like a door. The black shadow pulled me down into the red light, fell into the cold water, but the water didn't reflect me. I looked around to see the cabin sinking under the mist. I swam towards the shore, but there was no shore. There were only floating mirrors, reflecting my smiling face. Every time I tried to avoid them, they turned their heads. I took a deep breath and sank to the bottom, where the red light emitted from countless pieces of glass. Deep in the mud, they joined together. to form a giant face, opening its eyes, looking at me. I tried to swim up, but the invisible hand pulled me. Deeper, a voice in my head rang out, "Don't fight me, I am the real part of why." Woke up in the darkness. The cabin was quiet, the fire had long since gone out. I was lying in the middle of thousands of broken mirror pieces on the floor, each piece reflected a part of my body. I touched my face and felt cold, not skin but glass. I stood up and looked around. The mirror no longer reflected me. Only the empty room. I went to the door, but it wouldn't open. There was only a small mirror on the table, reflecting the burning cabin. I bent down to look closely and saw inside that cabin, me sitting motionless. I understood that I had been completely swapped now. I was the one trapped in the mirror world, and he was walking out to live my life. I was left with only silence and his shadow, myself. Time flows strangely in the mirror world, with no real light, only a pale light reflecting forever. I don't know how long has passed since that shadow stepped out. I stood looking through the frosted glass. I saw him walking on the street where I used to live. He wore my old coat. His walk was slow and calm. I saw him smile at the neighbor, and they smiled back. No one noticed anything wrong, but I knew his eyes were empty and didn't reflect any light. I hit the glass hard and screamed, but the sound only echoed back. I was like an invisible soul, looking at the world through a cold curtain. He lived my life more perfectly than I ever lived. He came to work on time, talking confidently to everyone. His calm eyes made everyone believe that it was me. He even called my mother. His voice was exactly the same, only when he smiled his lips curled up, but his eyes didn't. I watched through each mirror along the way. I saw my reflection in the car glass window, and even on other people's phone screens. His image appeared everywhere, as if he was spreading without limits. I felt the real world was covered by countless layers of invisible mirrors. One evening, I saw him enter a store near the area where I used to live. There was a girl waiting. Inside, I realized it was someone I used to know. He talked to her in a familiar, warm voice. They smiled at each other, and when she bent down, I saw his eyes glance at the mirror hanging behind the counter. In that moment, he didn't look at her, but looked straight at me standing there. He knew I was watching him. The smile on his lips slowly stretched like a tear, then disappeared when he turned away. I knew he did it on purpose. After that night, the girl disappeared. No one saw her again, only the mirror in the apartment she left was cracked in half, as if someone had hit it from the inside. I heard the news, and my whole body trembled. I understood that he had found a way to do what only I could do before, to pull others into this world. I saw a new figure in my mirror, a different face, younger eyes, scared. He brought her in and let me see, like a warning. I tried to shout for her, but in the mirror there was only darkness covering. I started to hear tapping from all sides 3 times. Regularly, like the beat of my heart. I tried to cover my ears, but the sound penetrated everywhere. I saw through hundreds of pieces of mirror around me the image of him walking along the city where there was glass. There he appeared, the light reflected his shadow in hundreds of different angles. Each shadow was slightly off, as if it was not the same body. I saw him standing in front of a large glass door on the side of the road, looking into it for a long time, then turned back. His face was empty, with no eyes, only deep black holes, and he smiled. He went into the places I used to go to meet people I used to know. Gradually, they also disappeared, one by one. I realized their images started to appear inside this world where I was standing. They looked at me with empty eyes like me. The first day I was pulled in, I wanted to save them, but every time I touched the glass, my hand went through the cold mist, as if touching water. I saw Daniels in the far corner. He was no longer burnt like before, but his skin was bright, reflecting silver. He said he'd been here longer than me, and no one has ever escalated. I asked him if there was any way to stop him. He shook his head and said there was only one way, but it would cost everything I had left. Didn't understand until I saw a large mirror in front of me vibrate and show him sitting in my apartment. He held his phone looking straight at the screen, saying, "I know you're watching." Then he turned the camera towards the mirror where I saw hundreds of silhouettes standing behind him. I realized all the people had disappeared. I knew he was creating a connection between the two worlds. He said, "Just one more person and the circle would close and there would be no more boundaries." I understood. That person was me. He wanted to erase me forever, to take over completely. I rushed to the glass, but it shattered into thousands of pieces. Each piece reflected my face, distorted. I saw red light from afar, his shadow gradually fading and disappearing. I sat down with only my breathing echoing from all four sides. I knew he was in the real world, and I was the forgotten one now. Every time someone looks in the mirror at night, I see his gaze behind them. He continues to look for someone new, and I can only watch helplessly from the other side of the glass. Time in the mirror world no longer has any meaning. Everything gradually fades away, leaving only the pale light of broken glass pieces suspended in endless space. I no longer feel my body, only my consciousness drifting among millions of reflections. I search for him everywhere, through each layer of mirror, but only see the image of a person living in the real world. He smiles, eating, drinking, sleeping, laughing, and talking with friends, living the life that I should have. I know if I do nothing, he will replace me forever, and all the souls dragged here will never be freed. I start to feel something strange within myself. Every time I touch the surface of the mirror, the image before my eyes fluctuates like the surface of water. I realize my energy is still connected to him because he has my face. I can affect a part of the real world when he looks in the mirror. I try it for the first time when he looks in the mirror. In the morning, I focus all my strength on the glass. The mirror shakes slightly. He stops looking around. I see his eyes stop at the reflection. In the mirror, I bloom the first smile in months, and he was afraid. He backed away. I knew my plan was starting to work. I needed a middle mirror big enough to pull him back into this world. I searched through hundreds of pieces of glass. In the reflective space, I finally found it. An old mirror in the cabin where it all began. It was still standing in the middle of the half-burnt room. The red light was shining from the middle of the glass like a beating heart. I touched it. I felt a cold electric current run through my whole body. The mirror vibrated in response. I understood that this was the only door still open between the two worlds. I had to lure him there. He was always curious about the strange things happening around him. I saw through the mirror he started to lose sleep, seeing shadows appear every time he looked in the mirror, seeing his face in the reflection out of sync. He thought he was losing his mind. I used that to call him back to the cabin. I left lines on the mirror with steam. When he bathed, the lines appeared. "In the mist, come back to where you came from," he read, and his eyes panicked. He knew someone was watching him night. There he drove back to the forest. The rain was falling heavily. The wind blew the branches against the car window. He stopped in front of the cabin. The flashlight in his hand was shaking. I saw clearly through the glass. He pushed the door and stepped in the virtual fire in the fireplace flickering. His shadow long on the wall, and the big mirror was still there. I stood on the other side waiting for him. He approached. His face paled when he saw me in the reflection. I smiled. He stepped back, saying, "No way, I am still alive." I replied, "No, you were just borrowing my body," shouted loudly, trying to break the mirror, but this time the glass did not break. It was soft as water. His hand slowly sank inside. I pulled him hard, falling face down on the floor. His scream echoed throughout the cabin. He struggled, trying to escape, but I did not let go. I had waited for this moment for too Long the light in the mirror was red. The two worlds merged into one. I felt his body getting heavier in my hand, and I felt myself being pulled upwards as if floating in the air, struggled out of my hand, rushing towards the door, but there was no door, only the mirror wall surrounding me. I walked forward slowly, step by step. He looked around. Panic reflection light, causing dozens of faces to appear around him, all looking at him laughing. He shouted my name, then collapsed. I bent down and whispered in his ear it was time to change place. As I put my hand on his chest, the light flooded out, covering the room for a moment. I saw both worlds merge, all reflections disappeared, only the only mirror was sparkling silver when the light went out. I opened my eyes to see I was standing in the middle of a real cabin. The cold night wind blew through the crack in the door, and the mirror in front of me was empty. I looked into it, saw my face was normal, eyes no longer deep black. I sighed in relief, thinking it was all over, but when I turned to leave, in the mirror, his reflection was still standing, their eyes glowing red, a crooked smile. He whispered in a hoarse voice, "I waited too long to disappear. You think you can escape?" I turned back, but only saw the empty cabin. The wind whistled through the wooden wall, and the light of the fire died. I knew he was still there, in the mirror, waiting for another chance. I left the cabin in the cold rain, carrying a long crack on my hand, where I touched the mirror. Every time it was dark, I seeing the red light flashing in there and hearing the laughter echoing back. I understood the loop never really stopped. I left the cabin as the sky was just dawning. The air was damp and cold, and the smell of smoke still lingered in the wind. I walked through the muddy dirt road leading out of the forest. The rain fell lightly like mist, obscuring everything I thought. It was all over, that I was back in the real world, but there was something wrong with every breath I took, every step. It felt like I was stepping on a thin layer of glass, and underneath was another surface, reflecting back. I looked down at the puddle. I saw my face reflected dimly, but my eyes were no longer their normal color. They glowed a pale red in the morning light. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself it was just lack of sleep. I returned to the city. Everything was the same. The traffic was crowded with people. I started working again, trying to live normally, but every time I looked in the mirror, I always saw something different. Sometimes it was someone's shadow behind, sometimes it was my face smiling, even though I kept a stern face. I covered the mirror, but I could still feel the gaze from behind the cloth at night, until I turned off the lights. I saw the shadow of a person standing near the window, reflected on the glass. I turned back. There was no one who day by day his mark began to show more clearly. My hands had thin cracks like cracks on the mirror. I covered them with bandages, but the next morning they spread wider under my skin. I felt a sharp pain, like something was crawling inside. I stood in front of the mirror, cutting the bandage. I saw red light coming from the cracks. I screamed and backed away, but in the mirror, my face was smiling. Blood ran down the edge of the mirror, dripping heavily. Went to the doctor, but he said he didn't see anything strange. The cracks were just normal dry skin, but I knew he didn't see what I saw, because when he looked at me through the mirror in the clinic, his eyes suddenly stopped for a second, and his face paled. He asked me if I had ever been burned or exposed to chemicals. I shook my head. He was silent, then quickly ended the examination. I saw my face reflected in the glass of the desk behind him. He was still staring with a fixed smiley. Started to stay away from all reflective surfaces. No mirror, no phone, no TV screen. I lived in a dark room with only a weak light coming from the crack in the door but I still can't escape. Every night I hear the sound of 3 knocks coming from the wall. The knocks get closer and closer until I feel cold breath near my ear. I look up, see his shadow in the glass window. He says softly, "I'm still Hariam, not scared anymore." I just feel tired. I ask him what he wants. He says, I don't want anything because I am you. I laugh crazily, then rush to smash the glass door. The pieces are scattered all over the room. I look around. There is only silence. The blue light reflects from the broken glass pieces spread all over the floor. In each piece, I see hundreds of faces like mine, looking back, each one smiling. I touch a piece of mirror, and a cold feeling spreads throughout my body. Wake up in the middle of a bright room. The mirror has disappeared, only a plain white wall remains. I hear the clock's hands ticking regularly. I walk closer to the wall, and see it is a bit shiny like water. I raise my hand to touch it and see my reflection in it, but the reflection doesn't follow my movements. I blink once, and it raises its hand slowly. Its eyes are red, and then smiley. Understand, he never left, he just changed his place. He's inside me now. Every time I see my reflection, wherever I am, I know he's alive with me, sharing the same breath and eyes. I feel him smile when I'm tired, and whisper that we want now. I stay away from everyone I know. If anyone looks into my eyes, they'll see him inside me, and then they'll disappear, like Lisa, like Miller, like everyone else. I've written this as a warning. Never look too long in the mirror when the light is dim, because you might see me and him looking back. Don't know how much time I have before he completely takes control of me, but if you're listening to this, look around and see if there's a reflection watching you. And if there is, turn off all the lights and don't look anymore, because I might be on the other side, just waiting for you to turn around.